say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. It's our first look at what is on the front of tomorrow's papers. But first, our top stories. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have been campaigning hard in crucial states, which could affect the outcome of tomorrow's US election. A British couple, Terry and Don Turner, are confirmed to be among more than 200 people who died in last week's floods in Valencia. And tuition fees are going up next year in England, the first increase for 8 years. Very good evening. Time then for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on the front pages of tomorrow's papers. We're going to see what's making the headlines tonight with Brian Closs, a political scientist at University College London, and The Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Evening to both of you. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at those front pages, starting with the US election, of course. And as the hours tick away to the big vote, the Financial Times has this headline: America votes as polls show dead heat. Same lead story for the Eye: America decides as the world holds its breath. Here's The Guardian putting it starkly: the US is facing its moment of reckoning. But with fears growing of what Donald Trump and his supporters might do if he loses, The Telegraph quotes Trump supporter and Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, telling him he has to accept the result and not fight it. Sir Keir Starmer's 180-degree uni U-turn is how the Metro reports the government's decision to raise university tuition fees by over 3%, 2 years after the Prime Minister pledged to abolish them altogether. Well, the Mail is scathing. Now that's what you call a U-turn, it says. The Star seizes on that story as well. Their headline: Return of the Clowns, and suggesting that this government is just as bad as the last one. Tomorrow's Times, however, says Labour is also promising that universities will improve in return for the increase. And on the subject of U-turns, The Express leads with calls to reverse the controversial budget move to charge farmers inheritance tax. And finally, The Sun reveals that the Gallagher brothers won't get paid for their Oasis reunion gigs until the tour starts, just in case they fall out and don't turn up, which seems sensible. And a reminder that you can scan the QR code you see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And to do that, I'm joined tonight by Brian Closs and Kate Andrews. Lovely to see you both on the eve of what is going to be a momentous election. And the front of the Financial Times puts it very well, doesn't it? America votes as polls show dead heat. How are we both feeling? Kate, why don't you kick things off?
How are we feeling? America campaigns for about 2 years at a time. So a lot of voters will be feeling relieved as they reach Election Day. Many other voters will be anxious. They'll be desperate for their candidate to win. I'm quite excited. There's nothing like a U.S. election. I was in Pennsylvania a couple weekends ago. I went to a Trump rally to report on it for The Spectator magazine. And while there are quite rightly reports of Washington, D.C. being boarded up, threats of violence, deep concerns about the ways that protests may escalate, we wouldn't suggest otherwise. It did feel like democracy was alive and well in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There were Trump supporters queuing around the blocks, and there were Harris protesters, and it was friendly, and people were waving their flags, and people were laughing and joking with each other. Ultimately, I believe America can get through this election. I believe that it will come out on the other side, a strong nation as it is. It is very tense, and as the FT points out, truly a dead heat when it comes to the polls, and even the betting markets are tightening.
Yes, interesting that, isn't it? And we'll talk perhaps about repercussions after the election in a moment. Brian, Kate was in Pennsylvania 2 weeks ago, and all eyes are still on Pennsylvania.
Yes, it's one of the key swing states. There's about 7 key swing states that we don't know how they're going to turn out.
And there could be others because there have been shifts in the electorate since the pandemic. There are shifts because of abortion politics. This is the first presidential election after that monumental Supreme Court decision. And as a result of that, nobody knows what's going to happen in the election tomorrow. It's an extremely pivotal moment for the U.S., but it's also an extremely pivotal moment for the world. And the other aspect of this that's worth highlighting is no matter what, we're going to make history tomorrow because we're either going to elect the first woman as president or the first convicted felon as president. And that is the nature of this election. It's a historic one, no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, The Guardian front page, very similar, really. Harris or Trump, US faces its moment of reckoning. And it could come down, couldn't it, to the votes of 100,000 people. I mean, we're not talking just about one state or even a county within a state, but even sub-counties within that state.
It could be fewer. If we go back to 2016, Donald Trump won the election across 3 states with about 80,000 votes. It was so at the margin. And I think there's a sense, in retrospect, certainly, that if Hillary Clinton has spent a bit more time campaigning in those states, it very well could have been a different outcome. If you break down where Trump and Harris have been since autumn, they have been hitting the campaign trail, both of them, every day in these crucial swing states. Neither of them seems to be taking these states for granted, which is a pretty big difference from where we were in 2016, and perhaps the reason that the polls are so tight. But as Brian says, anything can happen. That is part of the excitement. Back in 2016, Ohio and Florida were swing states. They were crucial swing states. These are now comfortably in the Republican camp. So the idea that we could discover tomorrow evening that a state that wasn't thought to be in play is all of a sudden, even if it doesn't flip, certainly in play, will dictate where American politics goes, not just in this campaign, but for the years to come.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that no one knows what the electorate is going to look like. I mean, we have an extremely high early turnout. We also, as I said before, have the first presidential election after this Dobbs Supreme Court ruling, which overturned Roe v. Wade and sent it back to the states. And as a result of that, the question that the polls are trying to ask, and may have answered correctly, may have answered incorrectly, is who is actually going to show up on Tuesday? Who's going to actually cast their ballot? And no one knows. And so there's a huge gender gap in this election. It's clear that Harris is winning women by a very large margin, possibly by the widest margin in history. We'll see how those shake out. But it's going to be crucial to figure out, are the polls not just getting the surveys correct, but are they modeling the electorate? Because that's also what the polls are trying to do. They're trying to figure out, of the people who are going to vote, who's voting for Trump and who's voting for Harris. And that's the X factor, is who's going to actually show up.
We know what the big issues are. We know the economy is playing heavily on voters' minds, immigration as well, and Donald Trump has talked a huge amount about that, hasn't he? But on the front of the eye, they also talk about the world holding its breath, making the point that from Moscow and Kyiv to Beijing and Tehran, global leaders wait to discover the future of the US. You touched on this a moment ago. Kate, how important do you think that is as a factor for voters and indeed for the rest of us as we all look towards the White House?
It is a factor for American voters. It is certainly what everybody in the UK and other parts of the West are going to be thinking about, because America really does lead on this, particularly when it comes to the war in Ukraine. What happens tomorrow night could be the difference between whether or not the UK is going at this with America or whether or not it's going at it alone. That's certainly the case. For American voters, it is not the number one issue. Donald Trump is pushing the economy and inflation for a reason, because voters have said for about 3.5 years now, almost since the Biden administration began, that is their number one issue. Harris is understandably pushing on abortion. She's trying to turn out the female vote. And that message does seem to be resonating, interestingly, not just with younger women, but with older women as well, who will have lived through a history where these options were not as accessible to them. The foreign policy issue is interesting because Harris does come across as the more interventionist candidate. She's been campaigning with people like Liz Cheney. There's certainly a big part of the electorate that will still like that position. But these things have been changing, and Donald Trump pushing the fact that he didn't start war when he was in the Oval Office is also very compelling with voters. That has been a big shift since the early 2000s, and one that could, I think, play slightly in Trump's favor.
And it's been a good policy of Trump, hasn't it, to bring out that old Reagan question, you know, do you feel better off today than you did 4 years ago? And, of course, the resounding answer at all the rallies that he said it has been a big no.
It's quite unusual because 4 years ago was the pandemic lockdown, so no one really has a positive memory of that. So it's an odd choice to my mind, but it's one that apparently is resonating with his base anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Let's look at the front of the Telegraph as well, because they've got quite an interesting angle. Farage apparently is going to be the only British representative in Mar-a-Lago as the results come in. But he's told Trump, do not fight the poll result. What's going to happen in the days following this election result? If he doesn't win, what happens next?
I think it's quite obvious that it's highly likely that Trump will reject the results and claim voter fraud as he did in 2020, which was baseless then and will be baseless this time as well. I don't think that Nigel Farage is going to influence Trump's decision-making on this. I think there's been a long strategy in laying the groundwork for this, and it has worked. I mean, a significant number of Republicans believe, falsely, that Donald Trump somehow secretly won the 2020 election that was stolen from him. Again, it was baseless, it's not true, but they believe that. And so the risk, I think, is that between the election and the inauguration, and this is, I think, possible regardless of the result tomorrow, I think that there is an increasing risk around elections in the United States that violence will take place. And it is a largely dysfunctional democracy in many ways around things like violence, because violence does not need 50% of the population to be on board with it. It needs a small number of people to be on board with it, and those people are galvanized. And so, all it takes is that person to sort of light that initial spark. And Donald Trump is very, very keen, I think, to light the spark if he loses. So yeah. I expect that Harris will accept the results if she loses. I'm sure there will be plenty of Democrats who harumph about it, but I think that ultimately they will certify the results. Whether that happens if Trump loses, I wouldn't be as confident.
Okay, we need to go to the break, but just a very quick thought on this from you, Kate.
Donald Trump is already using language to suggest that if he loses, there was foul play. It is incredibly worrying. I do wonder if he would be able to have the same influence he'd like to have because he isn't currently president.
OK, plenty more to discuss over the next hour or so. Do stay with us. Thank you very much. Coming up after the break, Conservative leadership rivals Robert Jenrick and Priti Patel join new leader Kemi Badenoch on the front bench, discussing that and more next.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
As America votes,
Win, 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 win.
Get ready for an election night like no other.
Join our team stateside
as we get close to the action
and bring you the results as they arrive.
with full reaction and comprehensive analysis, guiding you through the night.
In an election which could have huge consequences around the world.
America Votes, Election Night Live.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing the civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free, wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello again, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me in the studio, Brian Closs, political scientist at University College London, and the Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. Let's get straight into it. Kate, front of The Guardian, Jenrick and Patel join Badenoch's front bench. Robert Jenrick and Shadow Justice Secretary, Mel Stride in there as well, Shadow Chancellor, Priti Patel, Shadow Foreign Secretary. Not all fully confirmed yet, but it's certainly what we understand. Is this about unity, bringing the party together, showing that we can all work as one happy family?
It's supposed to be putting the Tory chaos in the past and bringing leadership contenders together into one shadow government. What's interesting here is that Mel Mentum is back. Mel Stride's been given Shadow Chancellor, and that is a very senior position to be going up against Rachel Reeves. There are some questions about Robert Jenrick becoming the Shadow Justice Secretary. As we were going on air, I'm not sure that's actually been fully confirmed yet. But if it is, that will be very interesting as to whether or not he sticks to his position on leaving the ECHR, something he would be talking about in that role, and the area perhaps where Badenoch and Jenrick were contrasting most in that leadership election.
OK, we're going to rattle through these, if that's OK. Front page of The Times, Brian, Labour vowed to improve universities as fees rise. First time in quite a few years that actually fees have gone up. It's going to cost students a little bit more. You have been an admissions tutor, I understand, in the past. I mean, do you think this is understandable? We know that universities keep telling us they're struggling.
Yeah, I mean, the costs of everything has gone up over the last 8 years, and the universities have had frozen tuition fees. Obviously, you know, a lot of people are struggling to pay them as it is, so it's bad news for those families. But, you know, it's about trade-offs when you govern. And I think one of the trade-offs that the university sector has had to make, and this is sort of the open secret in the university sector, is that the way they've dealt with the frozen tuition fees in the domestic students is by expanding the number of overseas students. And so this is something that's not just about the education sector, it's also about immigration, because the number of student visas has to go up to then subsidize the British students who are paying a frozen tuition rate. So all of these things are interconnected, and I think that what the government is trying to do is trying to sort of thread the needle of keeping tuition as low as possible, but also ensuring that universities don't have to shutter, don't have to do mass layoffs. And, you know, I think this is one of those areas where, like everything in the budget, it's a reflection of the least bad option.
Yeah.
And
what
that's
do you think, Kate? Fair enough? Or is it hypocritical of Keir Starmer? I mean, it wasn't even in the manifesto.
Well, look, I think it's fair public policy for all the reasons that Brian just laid out. The difficulty, of course, is to go from a position not all that long ago where you would scrap tuition fees to the fact that you are now hiking tuition fees. It's going to be difficult for a lot of your supporters and a lot of your MPs to swallow. And as you say, we did not get a lot of information about just about anything in that Labour manifesto, not on tax, not on reform, there was not a lot of public policy in there. So these feel like surprises. And one has to wonder, had the government been a little more open and honest about what it planned to do, perhaps they would have won 20 fewer seats, 30 fewer seats, but they might feel like, they certainly have an electoral mandate, don't get me wrong, but this might feel like less of a surprise when it comes up now.
OK, all right, great. Thank you both very much. We shall chat again at 11 o'clock. Right now, we're going to end the hour with a look at the weather. Well, it's going to be generally mild, rather cloudy and dry this week, turning quite warm in the sunnier parts, but expect a little light rain or drizzle in places. There will be a mostly mild, mainly dry but rather dull start tomorrow with extensive low cloud mist and fog and a little drizzle in places. The morning will be much like recent days, with many places staying rather grey and murky, but fog will lift slowly and there'll be more in the way of sunny breaks. Northern, western and southeastern parts look most favourable. Coming up next here on Sky News at 11 o'clock, the final sprint in the race to the White House. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump make their last pitches to voters before the polls open. All the details in a couple of minutes.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.